choose the right feed for your mount. My name is Mandy Alexander, and I am the moderator for today's webinar, as well as the Marketing and Instruction Coordinator at the Pony Club National Office here in Lexington, Kentucky. We encourage everyone to send in questions via the chat box during this webinar, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. We would also like you to know we are recording today's webinar. The video link will be posted on the webinar page on our site within 24 hours. Keep in mind that you may need to download some additional software to view the recorded presentation. Today's webinar will be presented by Eric Haight, Senior Vice President of Business Development for Triple Crown Nutrition. Eric graduated in 1977 from the Pennsylvania State University with a Bachelor of Science in Accounting, but went immediately in a different direction. Since graduating, he has worked in all areas of the feed industry exclusively, including manufacturing, sales, marketing, and management, primarily in the equine environment. He has been involved from the inception in the Triple Crown feed line, is a member of the American Association of Professional Animal Scientists, and has been a horse owner for over 20 years. Eric and Triple Crown are dedicated to staying on the cutting edge of equine nutrition to provide the newest innovations and the healthiest diets for our equine companions. Once again, we will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. We do appreciate everyone participating in our webinar today, and we encourage you to take our short survey at the end of the presentation. So, without further ado, take it away, Eric.
Thank you, Mandy, and hello, everyone. This is kind of a new experience for me. I've done a lot of presentations, but never talking to people while I'm looking at a computer screen. So please forgive me if sometimes I get a little off track, if I get a little confused, not actually looking at a crowd of people. Anyway, our goal tonight is to really make selecting horse feeds easier. It's kind of a daunting task. Sometimes you walk into a feed store and you see the multiple number of horse feeds that are available today, but it's really, what I hope to do today is try to go over some things and make life a little bit simpler for everybody. So let's kind of get started if we can, and let's talk about how to choose a feed. So when you choose feeding from a bag, and a lot of people use the term feed, a lot of people use the term grain, some people use concentrate. And what you're doing here is you're providing what pasture and hay do not provide. So pasture and hay is the primary portion of your horse's diet. And then feed will come in and supplement protein if it's necessary, calories if necessary, but always vitamins and minerals. So hay and pasture will never provide all the proper vitamin mineral balance that you need, but hay and pasture may provide all the protein and calories. So we'll kind of go through that, and so you understand that a little bit better as we go through these different feed groups. But really, looking at all the different feeds out there, there's really only 6 feeds, and then there's multiple versions of that. So we'll go through each one of these. First one is high fat, low fiber, high fat, high fiber, low fat, low fiber, low fat, high fiber, and then a higher protein diet, and then pasture balancer or supplement. And you notice I didn't talk a whole lot about protein, and unfortunately, so horse feed's kind of sprung from the production animal side, where protein's a much bigger or more important item in feeding their animals. So, I've been in this business a very long time, and 35 years ago, there really were not any horse feeds. There were beef feeds with a picture of a horse on it. So we've come a long way, but since those days, we've always talked about protein levels in the feed. But really, when we're formulating feeds today, we're really formulating more for fat and fiber and various other things, carbohydrate levels, and the protein really isn't a concern except for certain feeds where protein is required. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we go on. So what makes this very complicated is we have 6 basic horse feed groups we're going to talk about, but there's about 300 commercial horse feeds to choose from, and 300 may not cover them all. There's a huge amount of horse feeds out there. Many of them are the same feed in a different bag, and it can be tend a little confusing. So hopefully, if we go through each of these 6 groups, you can then decide, all right, which of these groups do I fit into, and then it makes the next buying decision a little bit easier. So let's move on if we can. So I'm going to give two basic nutrition slides. It's kind of hard to realize you're summing up nutrition for horses in 2 slides, and I'm in no way trying to do that. But I do want to hit a couple of things here that will be important as we go through this presentation so you understand it. So when we talk about fiber, fiber is hay and pasture are the horse's primary sources of calories. So when you look at horses, typically 50%, 50 to 100% of the calories and protein that horses take in every day is coming from hay and pasture. So, and as we get horses doing less, and their calorie requirements drop because they're doing less, again, hay comes up, hay or pasture takes up even a larger number of those calories. So, when we talk about fiber, horses need 2 things to live: fiber and water. So fiber is kind of a key ingredient, key nutrient that we're worried about feeding horses as we go through and talk about this a little bit. But understand again, when we provide a feed, we're just providing what you need that hay and pasture cannot provide for you. All right? Go to the next slide for nutrition. And we're going to talk about we're going to be talking about fat, and we're going to be talking about glucose. And the horse can actually utilize 2 different types of energy, and that's glycogen and what we call volatile fatty acids. So glycogen is the energy provided by starch and sugar. So, a lot of people are concerned today about high-grain diets, the amount of starch and sugar, or soluble carbohydrates, or NSC, whatever level you want to look at, talking about. But certain horses need glycogen in their diet depending on what they're doing. It becomes, as we go through these 6 groups, we'll talk about how certain horses need a certain level of glycogen, otherwise they just won't have the energy to do the job that they're trying to do. And conversion of glycogen into the actual muscle contraction requires very minimal amount of oxygen for that energy conversion. The other source of energy, volatile fatty acids, and this comes predominantly from fat and fiber. And these are energies that are being produced in the hind gut of the horse, predominantly. Glycogen is going to be produced in the small intestine, where it's going to absorb those starches and sugars. The hind gut is going to convert the fiber that we talked about a lot into volatile fatty acids, and also fat. Higher levels of fat we provide to feed also get converted to volatile fatty acids. From an energy conversion rate, the volatile fatty acids need a lot of oxygen. So what we have when we have a horse that has quick movements, or a racehorse, obviously they're running hard, and they're going to need that. They can't bring in enough oxygen to convert volatile fatty acids. So those kind of horses need glycogen. If a horse is, say, a pleasure quarter horse, not working all that hard, they can use volatile fatty acids and a lot less glycogen in their diet. So I think that's important to kind of understand. If you have any questions on that, it can get a little confusing sometimes, but a horse can use either of these energy sources, and that's important to remember as we kind of go into the different types of feed. So before we go into here also let me clarify, we're going to be talking about high fat, high fiber, and so forth, the different feeds we talked about. And when I talk about these are kind of my own definitions. There's no dividing line as to what is high fat and what's low fat. But for the course of what we're going to be talking today, high fat is going to be anywhere from 6 to 8% or higher. Some people might think high fat would be 8% or higher, because 6 would become almost like the norm in many horse feeds. And then low fat is going to be anything below 6% fat. High fiber, again, there is no dividing line that people can agree on, but for purposes here we're going to talk about, now as we look at feeds, I'm going to say 12 to 14% fiber, as a guarantee, is going to be high fiber, and less than 12% is going to be low fiber. So 12 to 14% or higher high fiber, low fiber is going to be less than 12%. Before we go into each of those 6 groups, Mandy, are there any questions that may have popped up in the meantime?
Not yet, Eric. We're still questionless, but
okay, no problem. We're early in. All right, so let's go through each of these groups then. And first is high fat, low fiber, and it's going to be the highest calorie, one of the highest calorie content diets out there. And this is going to be high in starch and sugar. You're going to see a lot of corn, a lot of oats, a lot of barley. This is maybe your typical racehorse type diet. It can be pelleted, it can be textured, it can be extruded, it can be found in any one of those forms. Nutritionally, they would be the same. But they can be in any form. That's really more dependent on your style, what you want for the horse. You really need to adhere. There's a kind of a rule of thumb in feeding horses to never feed more than 0.5% of body weight per feeding. So a 1,000-pound horse, you never want to give more than 5 pounds. And for this type of diet, you definitely want to adhere to that program. So if you have a horse requires a lot of calories, he's working very hard, you're on a high-fat, low-fiber diet, never feed more than 0.5% of body weight per feeding. If you have to break it up into multiple feedings, that's even better. Again, feed as often as possible. And with this type of diet, because it's low in fiber, you need to feed sufficient amounts of hay or turnout. A horse needs 1% of body weight of fiber every day in order to maintain a healthy gut. So a 1,000-pound horse needs to have at least 10 pounds of fiber. Again, that's hay or pasture, fiber content of the feed, to continue to have the hindgut or the digestive system working as best as it can. So type of horses that would be in a high-fat, low-fiber diet would be race horses, 3-day event horses, reining horses. I've seen these before. I don't know if anybody's ever seen chuck wagon race horses. They work extremely hard. They're thoroughbreds pulling a little wagon. But again, kind of fit into that whole concept of horses that are working hard, a lot of movement, and just need that glucose or glycogen energy we were talking about a little bit earlier. All right. Move on to the next one, which is high fat, high fiber. This is when we talk about feeds. When we go back to the high fat, low fiber, that's relatively new to the horse industry. Fat has only been added to horse feeds maybe 10, 15 years ago. High fat, high fiber is even newer as we look at these different high fiber high fiber ingredients like bee pulp, soy hulls, and so forth. So again, it's a high calorie content diet, but this is going to be low in starch and sugar, whereas the previous one is very high in starch and sugar. You're not going to see a lot of grain in this type diet. You're going to see it containing stuff like bee pulp, alfalfa meal, soy hulls. Again, it can be pelleted, it can be textured, it can be extruded. Nutritionally to the horse, it really doesn't matter in that form. Understand that a scoop of pelleted feed, and a scoop of textured feed, and a scoop of extruded feed are all going to weigh differently. It's going to have different densities, and that's really the main thing to remember when you're dealing with different forms of a feed. And we can bend that 0.5% of body weight feeding program because it's very high in fiber, so we don't have to worry about overloading the small intestine with starch. And that's really the concern about the 0.5% of body weight, is overloading the small intestine where it can't digest all that starch that we give it, and we want to get it digested in the small intestine because if it passes into the large intestine, it ferments extremely well, and now you have potential of colic, maybe even laminitis. So with a low fiber diet, you have to worry about the 0.5%. With a high fiber diet, we probably bend that 0.5% of body weight program, especially for senior horses that this is all they can eat. It can replace hay. When we talk about complete feeds in the industry, complete feeds means that you can feed it in place of hay, that you can feed just that feed and not feed any hay or pasture. We don't recommend that ever unless you have a horse that just has poor teeth and can't eat hay anymore. At that point then, a senior diet would fit into this category, and you could use that. So high-fat, high-fiber diets, horses that would need this type of diet would be endurance horses. Endurance horses give you more stamina. They don't need those strong power moves, fast power moves. A lot of horses, they need more endurance, and the volatile fatty acids will provide that. Driving horses, dressage horses, a lot of barrel horses now are switching to high-fat, high-fiber diets, even though they're running hard. They're running for 15, 16, 17 seconds. So they need a little glycogen in the diet, which you still get, but they seem to be a little bit quieter. And high-fat, high-fiber diets are working very well with barrel horses. Horses with limited and poor hay, this works very well. So we have a lot of years where hay is a concern. Maybe you can't get good hay. Then you can still feed the poor hay and feed a high-fiber diet, help supplement that hay. Remember to get that 1% of body weight. And then senior horses that are underweight, and we're going to talk about, there are other high-fat, high-fat, low-fat, get myself confused, low-fat, high-fiber feeds that maybe will fit senior horses, but senior horses tend to get a little underweight, a true senior horse. And when we say senior horses, we're talking about horses that can no longer maintain weight on a normal hay and grain diet, and those would be the type of horses that would be in this type of diet. And then the next group would be low-fat, low-fiber. And this is kind of a low to moderate calorie diet. And this would be what we would consider the old days sweet feed. Go to a local farm store where they make, not farm store necessarily, but a local feed mill where they make their own feed. And this is going to be typically the type of diet that you see. It's going to be a fair amount of corn. It can be high in starch and sugar. Again, it can be pellet, textured, or extruded. All these feeds can. Again, you need to adhere to the 0.5% of body weight. Again, because we have a lot of starch in here, a lot of sugar and starch. So we need to make sure we adhere to the 0.5% of body weight. And again, a large part of the diet should be hay. Anytime you have a low fiber diet, it should be in hay. A lot of the lower cost diets on the market today would typically be low fat, low fiber. Especially today when corn is much less expensive than it was, say, a year ago. So this type of feed, again, represents kind of lower priced options, often used incorrectly for easy keepers. A lot of people say, well, I don't want to feed with a lot of fiber, a lot of calories. I have an easy keeper. We're going to address that a little bit later on because you still have to feed a certain amount to get vitamins and minerals. Remember when we first started, you're supplementing potentially protein, calories, and vitamins and minerals that you always have to provide. So if you choose this type of diet and you're only feeding a pound of something on the feed tag you're supposed to feed 8 pounds of, you're going to be running short on vitamins and minerals. But this typically a lot of people get a little confused. It can be confusing and would look to this type of diet for an easy keeper. Type of horses that would need this, quarter horses, quarter horse sport horses, looking maybe, we were talking about a little extra activity other than pleasure horses. Active trail horses, those people that are riding on the trails a fair amount, not just the once a month riders. Next, when we go into is high fat, high fiber. And again, this is going to be a relatively low calorie diet, even lower than the one we previously talked about. The quality of fiber can vary greatly. So when you're looking at horses, when we're concerned about fiber quality, we want to make sure that the fiber is able to be digested. So I don't know if a lot of people know that overly mature hay is not very digestible to horses. Ingredients like peanut hulls, rice hulls, also would not be very digestible, and oftentimes they're a part of these types of diets, especially at the lower price diets. Because it's high fiber, can bend at 0.5% of body weight feeding program. Again, can be pellet, extruded, or textured. And this is also a diet typical of the hay extender products. When you see hay extenders or hay supplements or any kind of feeds that are intended to replace a little bit of hay, would still be considered a feed, would typically fall into this low-fat, high-fiber type scenario. And again, like the previous feed we talked about, it's often underfed. A lot of people will use this for easy keepers, but use it incorrectly. This feed, again, often represents some of the higher feeding rates among other feeds. A lot of low-fat, high-fiber diets. If you really look on the feeding tag, you'll see feeding rates of 9, 10, 12 pounds a day. So if you're not feeding that much, you're not getting all the vitamins and minerals. So again, it's oftentimes fed incorrectly for easy keepers. But the type of horses that may need this type of diet: occasional trail riders, quarter horse pleasure classes, horses that have problems specifically with laminitis. This would be very good. A lot of laminitic horses tend to also be a bit overweight, or certainly you don't want to get them overweight. So a high-fiber diet in any situation with horses with laminitis is the way to go, because you want to keep soluble carbohydrates as low as you possibly can. And again, you can use this like at the other high-fiber diet. You can use it when hay quality available is low or quality is low. High-protein diets, and protein is rarely an issue in horse feeds. We very rarely see a horse that's protein deficient unless it's just a starved or an abused horse. Typically, they're going to consume enough hay or pasture or even a little bit of feed you have to get protein. And the amount of protein in a feed, if you think of it this way, a lot of people say, well, I need a 12% protein versus a 10% protein. If a horse is going to eat 20 pounds of stuff a day, and you know, when I'd say that they're typically going to eat about 2% of body weight, so they're going to eat 20 pounds of hay, pasture, and we're coming in and maybe feeding 4 pounds of a feed. So oftentimes people don't know the protein level of the hay or pasture. They do know the protein level of the feed, and if you look through the math at 4 or 5 pounds of 20 pounds, whether that protein is 10 or 12% really is an insignificant difference. So don't get hung up on the protein content of feeds very much unless you have a specific need for high protein diets. And you can take any of the 4 groups we had just previously talked about, and all of those would be available in a high protein option. Because we're formulating today, we're not formulating for protein any longer like we used to back in the old days. We're looking to formulate for other nutrients, and then wherever the protein falls, that's where the protein falls. So protein is really typically should be one of your least concerns, again, unless you have a high protein requirement. We'll be talking about that. May want to consider high protein if hay is poor or limited. Again, hay provides a lot of protein, but if it's really poor hay, you may want to look at the higher protein feed. And the horses that need additional protein in a diet would be late gestation, lactating broodmares, breeding stallions, and senior horses. Those are the 3 groups of horses that need supplemental protein. We have to be concerned about protein content. Any other mature horses are not typically a concern. So again, horses that need this type of diet: senior horses, horses under the age of 2. I don't think I had that in the previous slide. Late gestation broodmares, lactating mares, stallions in breeding season. Again, these are the groups that need a higher protein diet or need to be concerned about protein in the diet. If they're anything else, it's really not a concern. And then the pasture balancer, the last of the ones we're going to talk about, is a pasture balancer slash supplement, we call it. So this is a situation where you have a very easy keeper. When I say easy keeper, I'm talking about any horse eating 3 pounds or less per day. And I put that in all capital letters because I want to be clear here. We're talking about any horse, and it doesn't matter if you have a senior horse is 25, and he's only eating 2 pounds a day. He doesn't need to be on a senior diet. He should be on this type of diet. So any horse eating 3 pounds or less per day should be on a pasture balancer or a supplement or an enhanced vitamin mineral type feed. Most of these supplements are high in protein because they're kind of soybean meal based, which is no big deal because you're feeding such a small amount of it. You're feeding a pound or 2 to a horse who's getting 20 pounds. So the amount of protein in the supplement is really a non-issue. Because you're not really using it for that. It can be used for that, but not in a typical diet. And you're feeding only 1 to 2 pounds a day, again, of approximate 20-pound diet of hay and pasture. There are some low-protein options out there available, but most of these type products you're going to see in the market are going to be high protein. Kind of the interesting little history on this, when these type products were first introduced, really 25 years ago, they were introduced because people then back in that day were going to the grinding mixing, the local grinding mix operation at the local feed store, getting their feed mixed up, and they would use this as the vitamin mineral supplement as part of the feed as they mix together oats and corn or whatever. That really is not the case. Not many people use it in that manner anymore. It's kind of transitioned into this type of pasture balancer type diet. Again, for those horses, what horses need to be on it. We're talking about horses very easy keepers requiring low amounts of both feed or hay, or even horses on plenty of pasture and hay, but getting very, very little to eat. Again, we talked about protein. We don't need protein in these animals. Calories, you don't need calories in these animals. We do need vitamins and minerals, and that's what they're designed to do. They're concentrated with vitamins and minerals. The horses need this type of diet. Any horse, I can't emphasize this enough, any horse that's eating less than 3 pounds a day would need to be on this type feed. You feed any of those other diets, and you're going to be missing the mark on your vitamins and minerals. Age and activity level do not matter. We have some Olympic level horses on these type diets just because their metabolism is very good, or that the hay that they feed is very good. So I can't emphasize this enough. When we do a lot of presentations, and we'll talk about this, and the first question will be, I have a fat pony, what shall I feed it? And so we always constantly try to pound as much information as we can, that any horse eating 3 pounds or less should be in this type diet. All right, so Mandy, again, before I kind of go into the next step, did you get any questions at all on what we talked about so far?
So far, nothing. You got a pretty quiet group here at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, what comes in?
All right, no problem. We'll continue to go then. All right, so we talked about the 6 different groups of feed that kind of will start making your decision a little bit easier, perhaps. But then you're going to go look, and you're going to see those types of groups of feed. And if you just look at protein, fat, fiber, you're going to see one feed at this price. You're going to see one feed at $2 higher, and you're going to see another feed maybe $2 higher than that. So you're going to find a dramatic price range, even though protein, fat, fiber may be very similar. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes some of these feeds different. So we'll talk about the economy feeds first, and those are the feeds that are probably the best seller for the most part at this point in time. They're typically least cost formulated. So in other words, when you look at the ingredients or you look at the guarantees will say the same, but the ingredients that make up that feed are going to change. So when you look at the tag, oftentimes you'll see information on the tag like protein products or fiber byproducts. These are kind of generic terms that incorporate maybe 20, 25 different ingredients, and allows that company to go out each week and look at the cheapest combination of ingredients that they can put together and still meet the guarantees on that tag. So that's what least cost formulation means. You're going to see typically generic terms for ingredients on the tag. You're going to see limited guarantees. You're not going to see a lot of nutrients guaranteed on that tag. When you look at minerals, you're going to be inorganic minerals. Now, the minerals will be called oxides, like copper oxide or magnesium oxide. And these are cheap sources of minerals, not very digestible to horses, but still can be guaranteed. You're going to see use of less digestible, less expensive ingredients. We talked a little bit about peanut hulls. We talked about high fiber rice hulls. It's just what they're trying to do is pull in the least expensive ingredients as we can, because it's a kind of a price-driven market, and so that's what they're attempting to do. There's a lot of talk today about probiotics and prebiotics. You're not going to see those type products in these diets, and it is going to have the highest feeding rate. So if you oftentimes when you look at these diets, again, you're going to see on the feed tag, you'll see feeding rates of 9, 10, 15 pounds a day. Very high in order to get the proper nutrition. When you kind of go into the mid-range, and typically found, and again, these are all averages, but we're trying to kind of break it down. They can be least cost or fixed formulated, depending. A couple of major companies in the market today used least cost for most of their feeds. And then a lot of other companies in the market, they just use fixed formulation. Fixed formulation means the ingredient mix, the formula for that feed stays the same week in, week out, and oftentimes across the country. So that's the difference between least cost and fixed formulation. And you know, oftentimes it's very important, especially if you're concerned about soluble carbohydrates. It's also important if you're concerned about certain ingredients that your horse may be allergic to. So in a fixed formulation feed, you know, you can identify those ingredients that they're there or not there, and least cost oftentimes you can. You'll see, again, generic listing or specific listing in these types of feeds. You're going to see more guarantees typically than an economy-based feed. You're going to start seeing some organic minerals come in, but they're going to be at limited levels. So they'll say they have organic minerals, but they may not be at levels that are necessary to provide the proper nutrition for an organic mineral. So for organic minerals to work, they need to be a part of the diet at least 20% of that mineral. So in other words, if you're looking at copper, unless it's the organic copper form is at least 20%, you're not getting any real specific benefit from that organic form. Organic selenium is now getting into a lot of feeds. That's only been approved maybe 8-9 years ago, but you oftentimes see these type feeds only use some organic selenium, and the rest would be inorganic selenium. Again, you know, making the tag look a little better, increasing nutrition a bit, maybe not going quite all to the next step we'll talk about later. A little bit better ingredient mix. You're not going to see maybe peanut hulls, rice hulls in these types of diets. You'll see a bit better ingredients. You'll start to see some use of probiotics and prebiotics. Again, they're typically not going to be guaranteed, or they're going to be guaranteed at very low levels. Again, all this is kind of keep that price at a range that the company feels the consumer will be comfortable with. Again, it's going to have a lower feeding rate than economy. So you're going to be talking about better ingredients, and where the feeding rate on an economy feed may be 10 pounds, this may drop it down to 8 pounds. So lower feeding rate, higher cost, lower feeding rate, and at the end of the day, the cost per day may be about the same. And then we go into premium, and again, typically found on a tag for premium are these typical things. You're typically not going to see this type of formula least costed. It's almost always going to be fixed. You're going to always see specific ingredient listing. You're always going to see a larger guarantee listing. Again, we're putting more nutrients in these types of diets, so you're going to see a larger guarantee. More and higher levels of organic minerals. Again, you're going to be getting into these feeds where they're going to be meeting that minimum level of required of organic minerals. You're going to see organic selenium at 100% versus some of it at organic, some at inorganic. In other words, if you can look on the tag, you'll see selenium yeast, which is the organic form, or you'll see sodium selenite, which is the inorganic form. So you can look at tags and you can kind of see for that. Unfortunately, there's no way to tell what percentage of each. Just like organic minerals, there's no way at this point in time to discern whether those levels of what the levels of organic minerals are. The only way you can do that is to call the feed company and hope that they would give that information. Again, you're going to see a little bit better ingredient mix. You're going to see probiotics and prebiotics. Now you're going to start seeing those kind of ingredients guaranteed in the label. And because of all these increased nutrients and better digestibility, you're going to see even a lower feeding rate. So again, where we're talking about the economy feed at maybe a 10-pound feeding rate, these are going to be 5- and 6-pound feeding rates. So you're going to typically see a better things you may not be able to see, like a better immune response. You typically should see better coat condition, hoof condition on these type feeds just because of the additional nutrients that are built into it. So that kind of hopes will help discern a little bit when you look at the tag and you see 4 or 5 different feeds with the same fat and fiber, but different prices. So that is really, again, trying to keep things very simple and basic, and trying to understand a little bit easier way, perhaps, to try to identify the feed that's best for your horse. I listed horses that were under each of those feeds, and that may or may not fit your horse. Typically, that's the type of horse that we see feeding those groups, but your horse may be a bit different. And again, I can't emphasize enough the amount of feed that you're feeding and that you're covering that base for you. All right, Mandy, now do we have any questions?
Yeah, we do. We have a couple questions. First one is a person asking if you can elaborate on what prebiotics are.
Be glad to. So you hear a lot of things on the TV today with yogurts and so forth. So you have probiotics and prebiotics. Probiotics would be live bacteria, live yeast cultures. So they're going back. Their whole purpose is to get into the hind gut of the horse and supplement the live colony of bacteria and yeast that is in the hind gut today. Prebiotics would not be live ingredients. So they would be maybe a yeast metabolite, a killed type yeast. These are designed to get into the hind gut and really help feed that microbial population. Prebiotics would also be, there are some prebiotics out there that are designed to enter the hind gut and help attract mycotoxins or help attract pathogenic bacteria like E. coli. These will all be prebiotics that go in there, and they're designed to improve the health of the biomass or the microbial population that's in the hind gut of the horse. So probiotics, live bacteria to help supplement what's already there. Prebiotics would be essentially killed products or products that would not be live that are in there to help supplement and make that microbial population in the hind gut healthier.
Okay. The next question is that someone has had an issue with a friend whose horse had selenium poisoning and is asking if there are any warnings on feed tags about watching selenium.
Excuse me, let me drink a little water. Selenium toxicity is in certain areas. Excuse me. Certain areas of the country where selenium levels in the grass or hay is high. Most of the country, the selenium levels are relatively low. Feed companies are limited as to how much selenium they can add to feeds to avoid any selenium toxicity. So very rarely would you see a selenium toxicity from a feed unless there was a manufacturing error. The advantage of organic selenium is it's much safer than inorganic forms. Inorganic forms are the selenium is used while it's in the going through the digestive system. What's not used is just eliminated in feces, and the concern is that selenium then potentially will cause a high selenium count if it's in pastures and so forth. And I don't think that's very much of a problem. Organic selenium is a much safer form. It's actually stored in the body as an amino acid. And the level of toxicity is 50 times what normal selenium would be. So again, in feeds, selenium toxicity from feeds would be a rarity unless there's a manufacturing error, because feed companies are limited as to how much selenium they can put in. If it's a selenium toxicity, it's typically going to come from pasture, maybe the hay that you bought.
Okay, and then our next question, are there different grades of pasture supplements? Are they all fixed formula or are some of them at lowest cost?
There would be both. Again, kind of we talked about economy, mid, and premium. You're going to have the same thing with supplements. Some of there would be a cheaper supplement, could be least cost formulated. And then the higher the more higher premium type supplements would not be least costed. So it's really kind of hard to tell. Some feed companies would show that information, some will not, as to whether they least cost or don't least cost. Sometimes they call least cost formulation something else, but essentially in the feed industry today, it's a much safer industry than we had 30 years ago, and I was part of the industry 30 years ago, so I could speak from experience. The safety of feed today is extremely high. Sure, there are mistakes made from time to time, but that's an unusual situation, and most of the major feed companies in the process today already have programs, safety programs built in that meet the new FDA demands that are coming out here very shortly. So, I kind of bounced away a little bit from the question a little bit, Mandy. But yes, I mean, you can least cost. Some of the lower price supplements will be potentially least costed. Some of the higher ones probably not.
Okay. That seems to be all of our questions. We'll see if anybody pops up here in a moment. But if there are any further questions, Eric has generously provided contact information there that you can certainly send him email and ask a question. You can also email at webinar@ponyclub.org, and questions can be asked for further on your webinar. Trying to see if anybody else is going to jump in there and ask a question. Looks like you did such a good job. Everybody got all the answers.
or confused everybody, one or the other.
No. Well, I think that's about it. Thank you, Eric, for presenting tonight. I know I learned a bunch. So, and I think that's the end of our webinar for today.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And again, please feel free to contact us. We make we're very open, and we want to make as much best feed recommendation as we possibly can for everybody.
I did actually just get another one that said, "Are Triple Crown feeds marked with the 6 formulas?"
They are, yes.
Okay. There we go. I caught it in there at the last second. All right. Well, I think that was our last question, so now we're all done. Again, Eric has generously provided his information here on the page, and you can always ask more questions. So, thank you again, and that'll be the end of our webinar.
Thank you, everyone.